Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Eric the Old Jarhead here. If you've watched my channel at all, you know that I'm into portable power stations. I like them. I've got my own off-grid power setup. If you've seen my cabin, you know I'm running somewhere north of 2,400 watts of solar power. I've got 360 amp hours of battery at 24 volts, which is close to 10 kilowatt hours of battery backup at the cabin. That's a lot. That's actually 10 times what this is. I'd have to run 10 of these to have the same kind of battery back up at the cabin. So obviously I don't need a power station for my cabin. I do use them for overlanding, for camping, that kind of stuff. I also use them for boondocking in my camper. When you're boondocking in the camper, the only 120 volt power I have is if I run my generator. Don't always want to run the generator, especially at quiet time. So having a power station, even in my camper, that has a couple batteries, though they are marine batteries, I do plan to change that, but right now they're 50 amp hour marine batteries, so you know, they don't have a lot of power, but you can run 12 volt. I can camp all weekend without any issues in the camper. And I have a 50 watt solar panel on the roof. But if my wife wants to run some 120 volt stuff, like her hair things, you know, I don't know, they're straighteners and irons and whatever they are, I don't know. I don't do my hair. My hair's really easy to do, folks. But having one of these power stations handy for that really works out nicely. And I bought two, one 3 years ago and one I think 2 years ago. And one of them was like 550 bucks and 500 and so many watt hours, like 520 watt hours. And the other one was like 280 bucks. And 600 watt hours. And both of them had like 500 watt pure sine wave inverters in them. Both worked reasonably well, but one of them at $550 had half the power than the one I'm leaning on right now that I'm going to talk about. The other one is just a little bit more than half the power this one has, but quite frankly, it didn't really demonstrate that it had the power they claimed. Not when I put it to work and tested it against my 520 watt hour unit. I'd say it was at 500 at best, right? Wasn't nearly as good. For 280 bucks, you don't get a great power station. But could you get a really good one for $400? Well, that's the question I hope to answer today. So I'm into power stations. I like them. They're cool. There are lots of great uses. You can use it for backup at home, camping, overlanding, even in a camp trailer or camper like we have. You could use them at your cabin. I wouldn't use this one to power my whole cabin because it would take more power than this has. I could in a secondary cabin if all I wanted to do was power some lights and maybe give the option for somebody to run like a coffee maker or something like that, or charge up their phones, charge up flashlights, you know, run the lights in the cabin, maybe run a little refrigerator like the one in my Jeep. Because I like testing these things and playing with them, and I just like power stations, EGRETECH came to me and they said, hey, how would you like to test out our Sonic 1200? And of course I'm going to jump at the opportunity. Absolutely. I like these things. So I did some research into it, of course. I always do that first. And I was kind of surprised. The biggest power unit I have before this one, which is a 1500 watt hour one with a 2000 watt pure sine wave inverter, it can only take 400 watts on the AC side for charging up the battery. This one can take 1,000. Now, they say 1,000, most I've seen is about 850, but it was at about 50% when I was charging it, so maybe it didn't need 1,000, but that's okay. That's still double what I could get on my next biggest one. And folks, 10 times what I could get on my $550 one with half the power this one has. Well, that's impressive. I was like, wait a minute, are you kidding me? That's fast charging. And I put it to work. When I got this thing, it was about, I think, 70%. I plugged it into the wall and I went, yeah, wow, 850 watts coming in. That's a lot. Now, it can also take 200 watts of solar. But I do have it's a $400 unit, so I shouldn't complain too much, folks, because I like this unit. For $400, I don't think you can beat it. I really don't. But I do want to be honest. I took this unit, I put it in the back of my Jeep, and I took off to go camping up in the mountains. I drove 250 miles, powering my refrigerator in the back of my Jeep off of the Jeep. I didn't use it to power, I didn't have this powering it. I was waiting. I got set up at my campsite and I plugged it into this guy here. And I ran it for close to 20 hours without draining it completely down in 85+ degree weather during the day. It was very hot. So the fans were running, the refrigerator was using a lot of power. It did really, really well. I was very impressed. But I wanted to test out the solar charging. And one of the things I thought would be fun to do would be, once I got it set up, got everything plugged in, my whole campsite was set up, I'd set up my 200-watt solar panel, I would plug it in, boom, and I'd go fishing. Sound like a plan. It can take 200 watts. Got an XT60 port over here on this side. I'd almost fried the port and learned that the over voltage protection and the cross polarity protection and whatever else it has works. I let some smoke out, but it didn't damage the unit. I melted a cable. It was an Amazon cable that, frankly, polarity was reversed on, and I didn't check it before I tried plugging it in. That's something I'd like to note. I have a charge controller I bought off Amazon with a little connector. Let me grab it. And when I first got this guy, I didn't think it worked, because I had 3 different type leads that I could use to plug into a battery. Plug it in, nothing happened, it didn't work. Well, after working with Bateria, I found out that these that I got with various chargers and, off Amazon are reverse to this. Polarity's reversed. They should plug in actually like this, black to black, red to red, but they won't. So I had to buy a gender bender to make it work. So that's what we call them when I was in telecom. It's called a gender bender. We changed the male to female, right? And now I got black to black, red to red, and it works fine, okay? Well, I had that problem with the XT60 cable that I bought for this, to plug a 24-volt battery into this to give it a whole bunch of power. Didn't work. Didn't damage this unit though. But I had that solar panel. I plugged the solar panel in, I went fishing, and then I came back and I checked it and I went, it's not charging. Why isn't it charging? I moved things around, I unplugged cables, I did all kinds of things, and finally I gave up and I put the solar panel away and I moved on. When I got to my cabin the next day, I pulled that solar panel out and I stuck my multimeter on it. Open voltage was 41 volts. So that 200-watt panel, probably about 36 volts under load, over 30 anyway. And this has a restriction to 24 volts. The input for solar on this through the XT60 port is 12 to 24 volts. So you got a 200-watt XT60 port, which frankly, if you got a 1,000-watt 120-volt port, 200-watt XT60 port, in my opinion, is one of the downfalls of this unit. It's a great unit, and it'll take that 200 watts if you can give it to it under 24 volts. That would mean you're running close to 10 amps too, right? I mean, 20 volts at 10 amps is 200 watts. So I suppose you could parallel 2 portable solar panels and do that. So that was a bit disappointing because I couldn't use the solar panel that I brought. But other than that, I did test it later and it worked fine. Even in hazy conditions, I was still getting 65 watts off of my 100-watt solar panel. So it does work. It's just that you've got really fast charging off of a wall plug and you got okay charging off of your solar. But again, it's 400 bucks. You're not getting a power station with a 1,000-watt-hour battery and a 1,200-watt pure sine wave inverter with, a 1,000-watt solar input, apparently. And I honestly don't blame them, right? For $400, come on. You can't beat it. And this is a nice unit. It really is a nice unit. We've got 2 120-volt ports, 4 USBs. So you got USB-A and USB-C 100-watt. So 24 watts and 100 watts, 2 each. You've got the car port as well. You got the XT60 on the side that will allow up to 200 watts of carport charging. I did not see 200 watts. Typically on my Jeep, I get about 90 watts, just FYI. So take that for what it's worth. But all in all, this thing ran that refrigerator for, 20 plus hours, no problem, and I still had some room to go. Charges up super fast on 120 volts. You can use solar. You can use your car. It comes with all the connectors, all the cables, everything else. Comes with a nice book. This is a really nice unit. It weighs about 22 pounds, so it's not super light. But all in all, it's well constructed. I've been really impressed with this unit. It does have a flip-up window on the side here. It's a little light, and I would imagine that it's possible this could get broken off at some point. But in reality, maybe it wouldn't, because you only pop it up when you're charging it off of something, which means you're not carrying it around, moving it around or whatever. So it's probably fine. But that is kind of a light piece. A lot of them don't have anything like this on them at all. And if we look at the other side from my 120 volt, there's nothing there. So do we really need a door over this side? Maybe, but I'm not sure if we really do. It's got fans in it so that when you're running that 1,000 watt input, these fans are running, keeping it cool. When it gets hot, those fans run. I had no problems with it. I really liked it. All in all, folks, I think you can't go wrong with the EGRETECH Sonic 1200 for $399 on their website. Drop a link down below for you to check out. If you like power stations, if you're into power stations, this one here is one to take a serious look at. The competition is getting stiff out there, so I think all these companies are really starting to put together some pretty good units to try and meet that market, which is really ramping up. And frankly, I like having more than one power station, because if the power goes out, I can run a refrigerator, a freezer, I can run my coffee pot off of one of these. It's actually really nice to have these as a backup in your house. And frankly, you just never know. When I grew up as a kid up in northern British Columbia, even on Vancouver Island, power outages happened all the time. And there was a few things that we always did. One, you get the candles out, the flashlights out, the camp stove out. Two, you filled up the bathtub with water and every pot and pan you could with water, because you didn't know how long the power outage was going to be. And then if you had a wood stove, which most often you do, you make sure you got enough wood out there, which you plan right before the storm season to have it. You're good to go. You can keep warm. You have candles and camping lanterns and that kind of, hurricane lamps, that kind of thing to have light. But those were days where you had a wall phone that, in case you don't know this, if you're younger, those worked off the power at the central office, which had battery and generator backup. So your phone always still worked. So you could be in the middle of a major storm, big power outage that lasted for days, but your wall phone would work. Even if your cell tower, which, oh yeah, we didn't have those. So if your cell tower didn't work, well, it's because we didn't have those. We didn't have cell phones. And you didn't have any other electronics, really. But, if the power went out, big deal. Go walking around the neighborhood and see what happened, or read a book. But today, if the power goes out, well, most people aren't that prepared. And God forbid you're in an apartment building or something, right? So having these kind of power stations are really nice. And I would suggest, if you're thinking about picking up a power station for home so that your coffee pot still works, look at the EGRETECH Sonic 1200. You can run a coffee pot off of this, though it's only a 1200 watt inverter. So if it needs more than 1200 watts, it's not going to work so much. But a lot of these modern appliances don't need that much power. So this will run, like my refrigerator at the cabin, it only typically uses about 150 watts when it's running. I've seen it run as high as 750. This will run it no problem. Not at all. Now, are you going to run for days on this? Well, with 200 watt solar panel, you're going to need a generator or something else to power this up after 24 hours when you've drained it down, because a solar panel would take you 5 hours if you could get all 200 watts, which you never get, right? You might get 150, 160 watts. That's assuming you have a solar panel that's not more than 24 volts too, because the one I've got is. So something to pay attention to. You could run like two of their panels in parallel, then it should work just fine, because they do sell solar panels, so you could check it out. But even still, if you're getting a full 200 watts and you completely drain this, it's going to take you 5 hours where you're not going to be able to use it. On the other hand, if you don't run it to completely dead and you let it charge up during the day, that 200 watts can provide all the power that you're using for whatever else, so that you can seriously extend the life of this. But for $400, folks, I've got to tell you, I think this is definitely a unit that you should check out. So check it out down below, and thank you, EGRETECH, for sending me this to test out. I love this little unit. It's a fantastic little unit. It's definitely one of my favorite little power stations that I have today. Physically, it's actually not much bigger than a 500 watt power station, and yet it's 1,000 watts. So There you go, folks. 1,000 watt hours of battery power, 1,200 watt pure sine wave inverter, plenty of ports, including a light, 1,000 watts of AC input, 200 watts of solar input, multiple devices at once. This is a really nice unit, folks. Check it out. Links down below. Thanks for watching, folks. Y'all have a great day. The Old Jarhead out.